Today we're talking about the dreaded target panic, and I had it worse than anybody for basically my entire hunting career until this year when I solved it in about a week's time frame following this process that I'm going to walk you through step by step. Now, there are two components to target panic. First, there is the identification of target panic, and then there is the solution to target panic. Now, target panic presents itself in a lot of different ways, but if you shoot a wrist release, there is a 95% chance that you have target panic, because this release is basically programmed your brain into shooting like you shoot a gun and pulling a trigger, rather than pulling through the shot and allowing the shot to break all on its own. And a lot of guys will tell you, oh, well, just get a hinge release or get a different type of release and you can cure it. Well, not all of us are made of money, and those releases are expensive, so I'm going to walk you through how to cure it with the wrist release. The first thing you need to do is be able to identify target panic. For me, I had a really bad case where I couldn't hold the pin on the dot. I would just lock below, and my bow felt like it was 100 pounds, so I'd have to then do a drive-by and pull up and shoot at the same time. But for many others, it's a little bit more subtle. It could be that your finger is not resting on the trigger, or you are just pulling the trigger so your elbow's not dropping back as you release and you just know the trigger's going off. Any of those are actually forms of target panic. Now that you've identified some of the symptoms of target panic, let's break down target panic itself. Target panic itself is broken down into your brain's fear of having the pin settle on the dot, because as soon as it's on the dot, it thinks it needs to shoot. And also your brain's fear of having your finger resting on the trigger, because as soon as it thinks it hits the trigger and starts to apply pressure, it needs to shoot. And that's from, depending on what stage of target panic you have, that's from just repetition of drive-bys, and every time the pin hits it, you think you got to shoot, or you consciously saying, pull the trigger, shoot, pull the trigger, shoot. And so then every time you think that you've got to touch that trigger, it's going to go off. The second component of target panic is not being able to set your pin on the dot, because you think that as soon as that pin hits the dot, you're going to have to release. And so this is where the majority of the practice is going to come into, and where my method will walk you through in a progressive manner a way to solve that once and for all. The first thing I did was adjust my trigger so that it would pull a lot and move a lot before it would actually release the arrow. And what that does is it starts to train your brain that, hey, it's okay for this trigger to move. I'm not going to shoot right off the bat. And that's one of the basic things. So you have to find that adjustment on yours. Mine is an Allen wrench right here in front of the trigger. Some of them are behind. You're just going to have to look at yours and figure out exactly how yours adjusts and set that, because that is critical. The second component to the trigger is making sure that you are resting your finger on the trigger when you're shooting. You want to make sure that it's hitting, in my case, it's hitting the second knuckle, and I'm putting my finger over top of that and just relaxing it so that when I get to full draw, I can just slowly apply pressure, and I'm not applying pressure with my finger, I'm applying pressure with my back, and it'll slowly pull through and eventually release that trigger. But that will then allow you to get past both the trigger movement and also allowing your finger to rest on the trigger. Okay, so now that you've got your trigger set and you understand how you should lay your finger on the trigger, the next thing you need to do is set up the target and prepare for shooting. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna bring the target in as close as you have to, and you're gonna use a huge dot. So a lot of these targets have smaller dots and things like that. You wanna have as big of a dot as possible, and if you don't have that, take a paper plate or something and put it on the target and use that instead of what is actually supplied with the target. When you're getting prepared to shoot, it's important that you accept the pin motion. You're focusing on the dot. You've got both eyes open, focusing on that dot, and that pin's gonna move. But as long as you're focused on the center of that dot, the pin's gonna return to center. And you're just keeping that focus, and you're pulling through. And more times than not, when that shot breaks, it's gonna go where you're looking. And so that component of accepting that motion and allowing your pin to sit on that dot are huge. Once you have your target set, now you're gonna get anchored, and you're gonna slowly start pulling with your back muscles this elbow straight back. It's gonna go straight back. And you're gonna just set the pin on it and just let it sit there, and you're gonna start slowly increasing pressure until the shot breaks. You're not worried about where the arrow is gonna hit, you're just worried about getting that pin on the dot and just allowing that shot to break when it's ready. And you're just focusing on the dot, focusing on the dot, focusing on the dot until it breaks. You'll still find yourself at times pulling the trigger and doing different things. That's okay, just keep working through it until you get to the point where on the big dot, you can consistently pull up, keep that pin on the dot, and pull through until the shot breaks. And once you get to that point, then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your target and you're gonna switch it over to a smaller dot at the same distance. And you're gonna do the same thing on a smaller dot. And if you're having trouble on the smaller dots, bring it up a little bit closer. Go back to the big dot until that sets your brain that it's okay to have your pin sitting on the dot. That's the whole goal here, is retrain your brain. As you start easing into shooting, it's perfectly normal not to be able to set the pin on the dot right off the bat, and that's why you use the bigger dot. But in really extreme cases, even in that situation, you still might struggle. And so there are two things that you're gonna need to do. The first is to draw and not put your finger on the trigger at all and just keep it behind, and just put your pin, put your pin on the dot, and just wait for a little bit, let it float, and then let it down. And then just keep doing that multiple times until you can consistently put it on the dot. The other thing is, once you've progressed past that, you're going to want to draw back, and you're going to want to settle it on the pin, and you're going to want to set your finger on the pin, on the trigger, and just sit, sit, sit. Okay, let's let down. And you're going to do that multiple times until you can get to the point where you can have the pin sitting on the dot, and you can have your finger resting on the trigger and pull through the shot without having any sort of adverse reaction. Once you're solid at, let's say, 15 yards or whatever that distance is that works for you, you can shoot the big dot and you can shoot the little dots. Now you're going to move back 5 yards, and you're going to go back to the big dot. You're going to then go in, make sure that you can still hold on the big dot. If you can't, then try to work through it. Keep trying to work through it. If you can't work through it, bring the target up, come back to 15 yards, keep working through it from 15 yards, because you know that that is going to work. Once you get to that point where you can do that at the next distance, then just keep moving it back, just keep stepping it back. And I encourage you to go way beyond what you would ever take in the woods. I like to shoot all the way out to 65 yards. And when I went through this process, I spent a lot of time at 45 and 55 yards because the pin started to move a lot more. And for me, the mental block was more around accepting the pin movement than it was actually being able to set my pin on it. And so as soon as the pin would start going outside the circle, I would start watching the pin instead of watching the dot. And that's not how you want it to be. You want to be focused on the dot. Now, I firmly believe if I can solve target panic in what took me about a week, I think that if you go through this process, it may take you a week, it may take you a month, but I promise you that you will be able to solve your target panic. I hope you liked this video. Hit the like button, and subscribe to our channel, hit the bell so you get notified of future videos, and check out some more of our videos while you're on our channel by clicking right here. Thanks for watching.